Well, welcome everyone. This is Wangmo Dixie. I'm here at Dharma College, which is based in Berkeley, California. And I hope to meet you, Della, soon. I'm upstairs and we'll be coming downstairs soon. Very warm welcome into our Wisdom Talk series. Dr. Ron Purser has been doing a wonderful job in bringing interesting and inspiring speakers into this format of having a monthly talk. So today we are very excited to hear from Della Duncan on working with wisdom and what is right livelihood. Ron will actually introduce you more formally, Della, but just from Dharma College, I welcome you all into the space and would like to also share with you that we are very interested in seeing how work can become a skillful means as a way to bring meaning and purpose into our lives. And in that, we also have a co-working space with that in mind and have a retreat that will be coming up in August focused on work burnout and how we can transform stress into a new way of transforming stress into well-being. And we'll be hearing a little bit about that towards the end from Terry Beckman, who is also on the Zoom call. But thank you all for joining us today. And I'm now going to turn it over to Ron, who's downstairs, and he's going to introduce Della. Della, thank you again for being part of this Wisdom Talk series.
Thank you, Wangmo. Well, welcome everybody in person here and on Zoom and on recordings. So welcome to our Wisdom Talk series. And this is our fourth speaker. We're just getting this series started up. And I will introduce Della. Della Duncan calls herself a renegade economist and a right livelihood coach and offers courses on cultivating regenerative livelihoods. She's the host of the very popular Upstream podcast, which is where I discovered her, because I'm a big fan of the podcast, and which challenges mainstream economic thinking through documentaries and conversations. She's also been a lead facilitator for the Work That Reconnects retreats, which were developed by Joanna Macy, drawing upon systems theory, deep ecology, deep time, transforming our relationships with power, with oppressive systems, and also draws upon ancient and indigenous spiritual traditions. Now, Della is also a Senior Atlantic Fellow of the Social and Economic Equity, a Senior Atlantic Fellow of Social and Economic Equity at the International Inequalities Institute in the London School of Economics, the course development manager for Fritjof Capra's Capra course on the systems view of life, a gross national happiness master trainer, a founding member of the California Donut Economic Coalition, and a senior lecturer at the California Institute of Integral Studies, Santa Cruz Permaculture, Vital Cycles Permaculture, and Gaia Education. Not done. She holds a master's degree in economics for transition with distinction from Schumacher College and a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and Sociology with highest honors from the University of California, Davis. A graduate certificate in authentic leadership from Europa University, and she's completed Joanna Macy's Work That Reconnects intensive program. So obviously, we're so pleased and privileged to have Della with us here, since, as Wangmo was mentioning, Dharma College and the Nyingma Centers have been interested in this notion of skillful means for many, many years. So we're really, really interested. We're going to have Della talk and present, and we'll open it up for questions and answers after her talk. So here we go. Thank you.
All right, test. Audio, video, all looking good? Feeling good? Excellent. Hello to those joining us on Zoom. Thank you. Hello to you all joining in person at Dharma College in Berkeley. Good to be with you. Let us begin with a mindful moment, just arriving and settling into our time today together. Wherever you are in the world, whether you're here with us in person or joining virtually, let us take a moment to arrive and settle, whatever a day you've had, whatever a journey you've taken to get here, whatever's happened for you today. So I'll ring the bell once. We'll just take a few moments to settle and arrive. Feel free to close your eyes or keep them open, whatever feels good for you. And then I'll ring the bell again and we'll dive in. Welcome. Come on in. Have a seat wherever you'd like. We are called to the place where the world's deepest hunger meets our deepest gladness. We are called to the place where the world's deepest hunger meets our deepest gladness. This is a quote from Frederick Buechner, and I think it's a beautiful invitation for where is our right livelihood for each of us? Where is that point? Where are we feeling called? So to begin, I just invite you to reflect on what is the world's deepest hunger? Is it showing up for you right now? What is it that's breaking your heart or that's moving you or concerning you? What is the world's deepest hunger as it shows up for you? And where does that intersect or connect with that which brings you joy or gladness, that which helps you come alive, that which makes you step into flow or thrive? We are called to the place where the world's deepest hunger meets our deepest gladness. So in this time together, we'll explore what is right livelihood. We'll explore if there's right livelihood, is there wrong livelihood? We'll explore what is work, if we're talking about work. We'll explore what are the intervention points for cultivating greater right livelihood, more right livelihood. And we'll also have an invitation for each of us to reflect on our current right livelihood garden, how it is and how we'd like to tend to it. So that's what we have today. And then, of course, some time for discussion, conversation, and questions. So what is right livelihood? Working with wisdom. What is right livelihood? Right livelihood is part of the Eightfold Noble Path from Buddhism, right alongside right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So just to say, it is a part of the Eightfold Noble Path, and I really, in my own view, see it as taking our mindfulness off the cushion into a path of engaged activism or engaged action. And Thich Nhat Hanh, if we look to him to look at what is right livelihood, Thich Nhat Hanh said, "Aware that great violence and injustice have been done to our environment and society, we are committed not to live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature." Try that again. Aware that great violence and injustice has been done to our environment and our society, we are committed not to live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. So another way to look at right livelihood is it is work or efforts that either identify suffering or alleviate suffering, or the positive would be guide us towards flourishing or thriving. Joanna Macy, the eco-justice Buddhist philosopher and activist, she offers us 3 dimensions of the Great Turning, 3 dimensions of this time that we are in, which is a beautiful spread of all the areas of right livelihood, all the areas that our work can fall within right now. So she offers us holding actions. This is actions and efforts that stop further harm and suffering from happening, alleviate harm and suffering that has happened, or identify harm and suffering that is happening. So this is most obviously activists, but also whistleblowers, journalists, right, exposing harm and suffering that has happened. This can also be academics, researchers, doing research to demonstrate harm and suffering that has happened. And it's also anyone who's doing the healing of harm and suffering that has happened, whether it's reparations or truth and reconciliation or therapies, modalities, etc. So that's one area of right livelihood, this area of holding actions and efforts to stop, prevent further harm and suffering from happening, or to identify, expose harm and suffering that's happening, or to alleviate, to heal harm and suffering that's happening. The second area of right livelihood, according to Joanna Macy, the second dimension of the Great Turning, is folks who are engaged in systems designs. So these are efforts and actions to design ways of living that are more supportive for human and planetary flourishing. This is in all areas and all industries. So these are folks that are working in education to make it more kid-friendly, more holistic, more embodied. This is working in politics to reform politics. This is working in products and services in all areas of our life, food and farming. So perhaps you are feeling that you are in that area. You are a systems designer. And it doesn't have to be innovators or people who are creating new. It can also be borrowing from or inspired by ways of living that do exist, that have existed, that are in more coexistence with human and planetary health and well-being. So that's the second area of right livelihood, or the second area that our work may fall within. And the third is the area of the shift in consciousness. So this is the area of folks who are inviting new paradigms or worldviews or values that are more supportive for life on Earth, shifting our ways of thinking. So this is most obviously our spiritual teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, who I mentioned, Joanna Macy, indigenous leaders, right? Like the concept of 7-generation thinking, for example, or Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So these ways of shifting our perception, our ways of thinking about our relationship with the Earth, with the more than human world. So this can be our spiritual teachers, writers, poets, musicians, artists. This can also be academics or researchers thinking of ways to think about what's happening on this planet right now. And it can also be our parents. So people who are parents are people who are shifting perception and consciousness for next generations. So those are the 3 areas of the Great Turning, these 3 areas that we can see that our right livelihood can fall within. So I just want to invite all of us now to just take a moment to reflect, which area are you finding that your right livelihood is in? Maybe which area are you currently in and which area are you feeling called to? Are you feeling called or in the area of holding actions and efforts to stop further harm and suffering or alleviate or heal? Are you feeling called to innovation or systems design or shifting ways of living or relating that are more helpful for this time on Earth? Or are you feeling called to work in the values and frames and paradigms and worldviews, perception? Where are you now and where are you feeling called in that schematic, in that map? What is work? What is work? So in these 3 areas of right livelihood, in these actions and efforts that alleviate harm and suffering that's happened and work to help human and planetary flourishing, we need to expand our definition of work. So I invite a feminist economics perspective, and an effort to say that work is not just what we do for money, but it is all of our actions or efforts to contribute to this time. So if you are someone who's doing care work for a child or an elderly person or someone with special needs, that too is your action or effort, your contribution, your work, your labor, that is valid to this time. Activism, art making, caretaking of nature, a garden perhaps, or an ecosystem. So an expanded view of work includes all the ways that we contribute to this time. So maybe take a moment to reflect on your right livelihood, not just as what are you doing for paid wage labor, but all the ways that you contribute to this time. What are all of those ways? Is there wrong livelihood? So if there's right livelihood, is there wrong livelihood? And if there is, what does that mean? So in Buddhism, a classic example or a classic definition or answer to this question you may find is work that is in weapons, human beings, meat, intoxicants, and poison. That's kind of the classic, what is wrong livelihood? It's interesting though, because when we feel into our livelihoods, they're so interconnected with others' livelihoods and systemically. There's the quote from Theodor Adorno, "It's hard to live right in a wrong world." So if we feel into the web of life, we may find that there are ways, even with our best intentions, that our lives can contribute to wrong livelihood. Again, a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, "Right livelihood is a collective matter. The livelihood of each person affects all of us. The butcher's children may benefit from my teachings, while my children, because they eat meat, share the responsibility for the butcher's livelihood of killing." So again, that's from Thich Nhat Hanh, but it's not enough to look to our own livelihoods, our own work in the world, but to feel into the web of life. How might we be contributing to planetary well-being or flourishing, and how might we be contributing to harm or suffering? Again, in our own livelihoods, but also collectively, and how might we intervene at that collective level as well? So it's a little bit of a koan, this idea that we don't want to be a link in a chain that leads to harm, and yet there's so many ways that our livelihoods are connected with harm or suffering that is present, that is happening. So a way to reframe right livelihood that is useful for this point is to think of right livelihood not as a destination or a fixed state in the future, but a path. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh says there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. So if we were to take that for right livelihood, there is no way to right livelihood. Right livelihood is the way. So all of us here listening and here in this room, we are on a path of right livelihood. And there's no destination to seek. It's just these iterations of getting more and more in alignment with our spiritual lives and values off the cushion into our path of engaged activism. So again, maybe a moment to just reflect on your own right livelihood path and just where are you at in it. Maybe you're seeking for what's coming next. Maybe you're well aware of some harm or suffering that your livelihood is connected to. What would it feel like to accept the path that you're on and accept that it's a path and not a destination? No fixed state to achieve, but a way of living. So how can we cultivate greater right livelihood? How can we cultivate greater right livelihood? Points of intervention. One is the content of our work. What is it that we're doing in terms of the content of our work? What is the industry or the effort that we are engaged in? That's most obvious, right? What is the content of our work? And perhaps we can shift that to make it in greater alignment with ending or alleviating harm and suffering and with encouraging flourishing. But also the form or the system that our work takes can be a point of intervention. So many times people work in a nonprofit or a charity or even an educational institution, and the content feels very much in alignment, but the form feels extractive or exploitative. Maybe it's very hierarchical, maybe there's not a lot of democracy in the workplace or transparency. Maybe the system that one's work is in, across supply chains or across borders is causing harm. So what is the form of your work and how could you intervene there? So just to uplift a few examples, some folks are transforming businesses to worker cooperatives, bringing more democracy into the workplace that way, more transparency, more sharing the wealth, sharing the decision making. In the nonprofit space, folks are turning towards worker self-directed nonprofits, again, bringing in that horizontal governance, that collective decision making. Other folks are working with gift economy models, sliding scale, like this event, right? Gift economy, sliding scale, making our work more accessible to more people. So what are the ways that you could transform the system or the forms that your work is in? If you're in an institution or a university or an organization, how are the forms creating harm or suffering, and how could that be transformed? Another point of intervention is the culture of our work, the culture of our work. Again, we can have a workplace with great content. The work that we're doing is noble or it's supporting thriving in the world, and yet the culture feels toxic or difficult. Maybe there's an overwork culture. I know we heard about burnout and overwork culture as an upcoming event here. So this idea of burnout culture or of overwork or having to be productive with everything that we do. So what are the ways that the culture of our workplaces can shift? What are the ways that the culture of our workplaces are not inclusive of differing learning abilities or even physical abilities, different viewpoints? So what are the ways that you can shift the culture of your workplace? The other one is the mindset towards our work. So the mindset of our work is something that we can also look to. The mindset of our work is, how do we view our work? Again, we can have great efforts and work, but really dread it or feel a disdain for it, or in some spaces that I've felt a little like I love what I'm doing, but I'm feeling a little agitated, perhaps. So what is your mindset that you bring towards your work, and how could that shift? Because sometimes that second arrow in Buddhism, right, is that second arrow of our perception or the way that we view things, and that could be a place that we work. So how is your mindset towards your work something that you can shift? And finally, to add this idea that our work is also part of a larger system. So just to acknowledge that our work right now is under capitalism.
I don't know.
And capitalism makes it so that our work is very difficult to be ethical and just.
Why was mic is on? Why was laptop?
So how is it that our work is actually made more difficult under capitalism? And how could we shift the current economic system that we're in so that more people can access right livelihood, right? Is right livelihood a privilege, right? Is even talking about right livelihood is a privilege? I do feel that folks who do feel they are really on the path of right livelihood and can really align their work with their values in a very solid way, that can be a space and a source of great privilege. And it takes a lot of privilege to be able to do that. And yet, what are the ways that we can make it so that more people can cultivate right livelihood? What are the systemic changes, such as the 4-day work week or universal access to basic services or moving to a post-capitalist economy? What would be those systemic interventions that would allow for more people to be able to cultivate right livelihood? So those are some points of intervention. And again, I invite you to sense into your right livelihood path and sense into where you might want to put some attention towards. Is it the content of the work that you're doing? Is it your mindset? Is it the culture of your workplace that could use some attention? Is it perhaps the form of your workplace that could use some attention and some shifting? Or are there ways that you can contribute to this larger systemic change for your own livelihood and for that of others? So finally, I want to invite a prompt for us to reflect on our own livelihoods. I'm just going to shift the video so that people can see me. Can the folks see? Yeah, beautiful. All right. So this is an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own right livelihood garden. So it's a metaphor that I offer to you if you find it useful to reflect on your own livelihood garden. So you can receive it as a visualization if you want to just reflect on it, see what comes up. Or if you have something to write with and something to write on, or if that's a way that you like to reflect, you may want to do that too. So my first question for you is, what are the plants in your livelihood garden? Yes. I'm going to make sure that we're sharing the screen with our participants. So give me 1 second. There we are. All right. So the first invitation for you all is to reflect on what are the plants in your garden. So however your garden is right now, whatever's going on in your garden, what are the plants in your garden? So what are the ways that you contribute to this time? So go ahead and reflect on those for a moment. Perhaps you have some paid jobs, or maybe you have caretaking that you do. Maybe you have an art project or activism you're involved with, a volunteer effort. So just to first, what are the plants in your garden? What are all the ways that you contribute to this time with this expanded view of work, this feminist economics, this Buddhist economics, taking a wider range of our contribution to the world? So what are the plants in your garden? And perhaps you have an actual plant that comes to mind. Maybe one is an oak tree, or one is a bush. Maybe one is a flower or an herb. So what are the plants in your garden? And what stages are they in? Maybe you have some little new shoots, like you just joined a band and it's just getting started. Or maybe you have a full-grown oak tree, a project you've been doing for 30 years that's just bountiful and providing lots of shade and abundance in your garden. So what are the stages of the plants in your garden? And what are the fruits or the gifts that each plant offer? So financial fruit may be one of the plants. Maybe there's a plant that's really helping you pay your bills. But maybe there's also a plant that doesn't provide any financial monetary value, but you're on a team and you love being on a team, or it helps you learn. Or maybe you feel embodied and you get a sense of strength and embodiment and connection, or maybe spiritual growth. So what are the offerings of the plants in your garden? What are the fruits or the offerings? And what are the relationships between these plants? Maybe they're symbiotic, maybe they're companion plants. Oftentimes our plants are connected with one another. For example, folks listen to the Upstream podcast and then they reach out for Right Livelihood coaching. So those plants have a very symbiotic, connected relationship. You can visualize that as the mycorrhiza fungi underneath the soil, or perhaps there's some pollinators that are cross-pollinating your plants. So what are the relationships between your plants? Can you see that symbiosis, that collaboration, that cooperation? Are there any obvious synergies? And in your garden, in your Right Livelihood garden, I invite you to imagine a compost pile, a compost pile. This is a reframe. So instead of thinking about the jobs or the roles or the projects or the endeavors, the efforts that we've let go of, that they were failures, that they didn't work, what if we thought of them as compost, going into the soil to serve what comes next? So what is in your compost pile? What role have you retired from? What project have you let sunset? What have you said goodbye to? And how is that serving you now? It's not a failure, but it's serving the soil. It's making nourishment for what's coming next. So what is in your compost pile? So I'll give you a moment to reflect on that. The plants in your garden, their stages, the fruits, the relationship, and the compost pile. Next, we move to tending. And I will share these slides with our host so that you can receive them after in case you'd like more time with them. Tending to your garden. What in your garden would you like to water? We all have projects that we've maybe abandoned or are not doing so well. We'd like to give some more attention or time to. What is it that you'd like to water? What is it that you'd like to give a little bit more time and attention to? What is it that you'd like to water, put some more attention and time towards? What is it that you'd like to plant? Maybe something from earlier, these areas of the Great Turning, made you think of a project or endeavor that you'd like to seed or to plant. Maybe there's a trimming or a cropping from another plant that you'd like to plant, but what is that idea, that project, that inspiration that you've been really wanting to dive into? A new action or effort or endeavor. So what is that new seed of an idea or an inspiration that you'd like to plant? Maybe a new job, a new effort. Maybe something that would be very complementary to the other plants in your garden. What is it that needs to be pruned? We all have plants that take a lot of space in our gardens, that are really overgrown. Either they take all of our time or maybe all of our energy. We come home depleted, right? So what are those plants that need to be pruned? And pruning is a metaphor not just for pinching or breaking off, but it's about guiding our energy towards the fruits. We're guiding our energy somewhere. So what is it you'd like to guide your energy towards? What is it that needs to be pruned, cut back, whittled? And what is it that you'd like to guide your energy towards? And finally, what is it you'd like to compost? What is it you'd like to compost? Maybe there's a project or endeavor that it's time, right? This idea in capitalism that things must grow forever, that growth of all time is good, right? But things have cycles and seasons. So what is it that is ready to be composted? Are you ready to say goodbye to? Give you another moment to reflect on that. The tending to your garden, what you'd like to water, plant, prune, and compost. What about your soil? Our soil is a metaphor for our self-care, right? To be able to grow the plants that we need to grow, we need to have good, healthy soil. So take a moment to just connect to what is the condition of your soil. When you reflect on your soil, how does it feel? Does it feel healthy and vibrant and ready for project and effort or endeavor? Or is it in need of rest? What is the condition of your soil right now as you check in today? Are you burnt out? Are you overextended, depleted? Or are you feeling well resourced and nourished and supported? How do you care for your soil? So this is a little bit of appreciative inquiry. What are the ways that you care for your soil? And if you're drawing your garden now, you can draw under the soil all the ways that you support your soil. What are the ways that you care for your soil? What are the people and the practices, the places, the rituals that nourish you, that give you resilience? And finally, what's the support that you'd like to ask for or seek out? As we're in the ecotone between, the ending of winter and spring and moving into summer, what is it that you'd like to ask for and seek out? What resources, what support? So give you a moment to reflect on your soil and how it's feeling, how you care for it, and what support you'd like to ask for or seek out. And last set of prompts, last set of reflections. So this is zooming out. What season is your garden in? What season is your garden in? And different places have different seasons. This idea of 4 distinct, discrete seasons that look the same everywhere on the planet is not true. So what is the season that your garden is in? What does that feel like? What would it feel like to accept your season? Accept the season of your Right Livelihood garden. And our gardens are not alone. We're not isolated, rugged individuals, as capitalism would have us believe, but we are interconnected. Our gardens are part of others' gardens. So whose or what gardens is yours connected with? Maybe there's movements that your garden is a part of. Maybe there's other collaborators or teams that are connected to your garden through the mycelial web under the soil, through the pollinators, through trimmings or clippings or the same plant. So what are the other gardens that support your garden or that you're connected with? And if you zoom out for a moment, looking at your garden, reflecting on all these plants and the ways that you'd like to tend towards your garden, what is the title of your garden? What's the title of your garden? As Ron introduced me, the title I've come to is Renegade Economist. All the different plants in my garden, this heading, this title, this sign that would be in my garden is Renegade Economist. That's how I make sense of it. That's what it all comes to for me. What about you? What would be your title or your mythopoetic identity? Right? Your mythopoetic identity. What would be the title of your garden right now? It can shift, it changes throughout our lives. What would it be right now? And finally, when would you like to check back on your garden? Because it can be a really useful thing to ask these questions of yourself and do this exploration, whether it's through drawing or writing or journaling or even reflecting, maybe twice a year, at least once a year, but just to feel into, how does my Right Livelihood feel? How does my Right Livelihood garden feel? How is my soil feeling? How do I want to tend to it? I'll give another moment for these reflection questions. The season of your garden, the other gardens yours is connected to, the title of your garden, and when you want to check back. All right. That's what I'm trying to do. Oh, got it.
At the top. At the top are three buttons.
Yeah.
It's the third one, that one, yeah. There we are. Oh, no, you still left it with the participant.
So to close before opening to questions, I just want to close with a quote. This is an Audrey Hepburn quote. To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. So wherever your Right Livelihood garden is right now, we're feeling into it today, you are on that path. And I hope these explorations of what is right livelihood, this invitation to find that place where the world's deepest hunger meets your deepest joy or gladness, this contemplation on wrong livelihood and how we may be contributing to harm or suffering, these intervention points, these ways of intervening in our right livelihood gardens, and then this sense of a metaphor to think about our right livelihood gardens and how we may want to tend to them as we go forth from this time. So now I'd love to open it up for conversation. I'd love to hear from folks, not just questions, but insights, ahas, maybe disagreements even. All is welcome. So what is it that felt useful or helpful to you as you were listening? What is it that resonated? What is it that maybe shifted something in the way you were thinking? What are you going forth with, committing to, or going to try or prototype? And then if there are any questions or need for clarification for anything that I shared. So anyone maybe in our in-person time, and then we'll see if anyone there has any.
First, thank you for this wonderful presentation, Della. What I really enjoyed, and I thought, is the use of metaphor. The vegetation metaphor. The reason I say that is that it seems like metaphor gets at parts of our mind that logic or reason doesn't, in the sense of, like the unconscious seems to listen to metaphors more than words, even though we're using words. And there's a book that just came out that really struck me and reminded me of what you were saying. Is the title of the book is "You Are a Tree," as a metaphor, because in the modern industrial world, we tend to identify ourselves as machines, right, that are constantly on. We're a 24/7 overworked society that has no sensitivity to natural cycles, even of our own creativity, our own need for rest and regeneration. And I wonder if you could speak about that a little bit, the need to be in tune with our own cycles, kind of, and how that relates to well-being, how it relates to, just the overall sense of harmony.
Yeah, happy to. Great question. So yeah, as I mentioned, this idea of nature moving in rhythms and cycles and our economy not, right? This endless growth, this like exponential curves, and how disconnected that is. And so, one thing that we mentioned, or that I mentioned in this, was projects or efforts or roles not lasting forever. I've had so many people who've said, you know, and now we're going to sunset this project, or this is going to come to an end. And that can be quite radical, that a project doesn't grow forever, or, you know, that it has an end. And so to accept that kind of natural timing of something, like my time with this project is done, or this endeavor, or this organization is done, that can be quite a radical thing. And then, of course, on our individual physical levels, appreciating the seasons that we are a part of, but also our own bodies and our needs for our bodies, right? And so all of that, I'm thinking of in Europe, I saw recently that I think it was Spain was one of the first countries to allow for time off work for folks menstruating. You know, what a radical thing, that we could appreciate the cycles of the body, right? And I also appreciate too Shabbat, sabbatical, coming from that tradition, coming from the resting of a field on the 7th year. And so this idea of land or ecosystems needing to rest, right? The soil can't be productive all the time. The garden can't be productive all the time. So to let things go to fallow and see what, you know, volunteer plants want to come. But also that idea of sabbatical for those professions, which I know yours is one of them, that has that. What a gift from everyone I've heard who's gotten to do that sabbatical act. So how can we, again, that systemic change, advocate for more sabbaticals in whatever fields that we are in? But I also know folks who are really disconnecting in times of the year or times of the week from technologies or from work. Or I know a lot of people in Europe are saying, you know, August, like, don't even email me, I'm not available. So I'm just appreciating and uplifting more slowing down, right? Bioakumalafe says, the times are urgent, let us slow down, right? So that slowing down, that appreciation of our bodies and the cycles that we're in, and then the seasons. And really seeing self-care and that care for our soil to be necessary so that we can show up in the world. But it's a radical act, right? To do that work. So yeah, thank you for adding that beautiful point. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions.
Would you like to come up here? I think it'd be easier for
Yeah, maybe people
so
can
that
see me, I guess.
so people can see you.
Sit in front of the camera and ask the questions, huh? Okay. Well, so my first question is, you know, within a month, there are going to be 12,000 kids graduating from Berkeley, and probably 500,000 graduating across the whole of America. And I really wanted to ask you about that, because, you know, really that's the bulk of society. It's pretty much 99% of it, in terms of what people are going to be doing. And I think a lot of young people, particularly Gen X and Gen Y, are very concerned about right livelihood. They want to keep their ethical basis, but they don't really have any means to do this when they go into the workplace. And of course, the vast majority of these folk will go into companies, some of which do good things, some of which do bad things, but often the same companies doing good and bad things. And that's where the problem comes from. I used to run a pharmaceutical company. We had to do animal testing. It's a requirement. It's not, you know, if you're going to make medicines, and if you're going to take medicines, you are basically responsible for animal testing. It's the law, and there's no way out of it. So you either don't make medicines or you accept animal testing as a good example. And, you know, many industries have this problem. And we live in a world now where, you know, whatever it is, 1.5 billion people have come out of poverty in the last 20 years. So many people would say, well, it's fantastic. We're doing really, really well. But what does right livelihood have to say about that? Now, to me, this is a big issue because many of the Buddha's teachings are directly relevant to modernity. But I think right livelihood is particularly challenging because everything, as you say, is so interconnected. And it is so hard to see how you actually do anything about the economic structure, which is going to continue. There's no question. And so I'd love to hear what you would say, for example, to the graduating class of Berkeley in 3 weeks' time, when all these kids are going to hit the workplace. And a lot of them are going to go and work for banks or whatever. And, you know, they're high flyers. But how do we help them achieve right livelihood? And the other question I just want to ask you personally is why you regard yourself as renegade. It's an interesting word, and to be a renegade economist is particularly striking. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful questions. And we are just blocks away from UC Berkeley, so wonderful to think about. I actually saw a graduate today walking, and I actually worked at UC Berkeley a few years ago, and I do remember the story of a young person who had gotten a job at a renewable energy project and also an oil company, and chose the oil company because of the student debt and the stability that they saw for that choice. And I remember feeling the heartbreak of that. And so, yes, excellent question, very real. And a few things come to mind. One of them is, one intervention that I would love to see is for business schools, coding academies, career coaches, counselors to showcase and offer the alternative forms that do exist. Right, that worker cooperatives are a form, right? That a worker self-directed, nonprofit is a form, that a not-for-profit business model is a form, which I'll talk about in a moment. But just to share those models for students who may create their own companies or projects or endeavors, they don't even know they exist. So just to highlight that these more equitable, more democratic, more sustainable, more regenerative forms are there to apply for them or to create them. I think that's a huge thing. Like, I would love to see for every coding academy in the tech world in the Bay Area, instead of just pitching your idea to venture capitalists, how could this be a worker cooperative, right? Or what's the alternative model that this could take? So I mentioned this thing called the not-for-profit business model. And what I mean by that is a mainstream or traditional nonprofit is 50% or more of funding funded by grants or donations. Okay, that's the one that we all maybe think about and know. But a not-for-profit business or a not-for-profit business hybrid is a nonprofit that can receive sales of goods and services and can utilize that money as unrestricted or unallocated funding to do the work they want to do. Now, why is this important? It's important because we know that grant funding and donations can really restrict the work of nonprofits, right? And often they feel their hands are tied, or they have to really look towards the numbers or the grant requirements. So unrestricted funding is really liberating for nonprofits or for social mission-driven organizations. Another reason why this is important, and I'm going to uplift Dr. Jennifer Hinton here, who's really leading work on this, that profit is a key point to growth and inequality and environmental degradation and corporate consolidation. This addiction to profit or need to produce a profit. And this not-for-profit hybrid business model instead says, what is the sale of goods and services that one could do, but then have that go towards the mission-driven work, okay? And this model already exists. The YMCA is a not-for-profit business, right? Sale of a gym membership going towards after-school programs for youth. The Interval in San Francisco, cool swanky bar at the bottom, 100% of the profit goes to the environmental conservation work that they do. So that's another model, and that's even less known than the not-for-profit, the worker self-directed nonprofit or the worker co-op. And what that model does too is it doesn't stigmatize or alienate anyone who calls themselves entrepreneurial, right? It says, great, you're entrepreneurial, you're business-minded, excellent. But what mission-driven cause do you want your worker efforts to support? Now, if we zoom out from this for a second, an even more crucial piece to look at is enoughness or contentment. And Buddhism has so many great, interventions here. What is enough? What is sufficient? And E.F. Schumacher, his real awakening was going to Burma and realizing people didn't want more and more. They were trying to be happy with less and less. His whole essay on Buddhist economics was, wow, contentedness, enoughness. So thinking of gratitude, as Joanna Macy would say, gratitude is a radical act in the growth industrial society that wants us to continue wanting more and more. So gratitude and enoughness is a quite radical thing. So I just want to acknowledge that for folks who are under the Kahneman curve, which is the curve of happiness and income, right? If you're under, then yeah, more money does equal more happiness. You need more happiness. But the Kahneman curve really shows that there is a point of enoughness for all of us. There's a point, I'm doing this gesture here, where it plateaus. So my invitation for students, they may be well below that line because student debt or they don't have work, and so there may be some income earning that needs to happen. But what is that point of enoughness? And a real helpful guide for this, Manfred Max Neef, who founded Barefoot Economics, and he's a Chilean economist. He had passed away, but he talks about fundamental human needs. And he says, what are your needs? And then how do you meet them? And then my question would be, how much do you need to make to meet your needs, right? To get to that point of enoughness. And then you have enoughness. You don't need to make more and more and more. We don't need to grow and grow. You can practice contentedness and enoughness. But then you can bring in solidarity economy, new economy, gift economy, ways of meeting your needs. There's all these beautiful ways that folks are meeting their needs through trade, through gift, through share shops, right? There's all these different ways that we can meet our needs through volunteering at a garden for some of your food. There's some housing ways that people can meet their needs. So that is something I would invite too. So I would invite these alternative post-capitalist forms, solidarity economy forms that exist. And I would also invite this question around what is enoughness? We are attentive to what we measure. We are attentive to what we measure. So what is our definition of success, of development? And how can we unhook it from this materialistic growth-minded mindset and have it be something a little bit more in alignment with right livelihood? But I absolutely hear you. Excellent questions. And then the second point around being a renegade economist, that title came from Kate Raworth, who's a renegade economist, or she was called a renegade economist. So I said, I would love to be a renegade economist. So it was inspired by her. Kate Raworth is the founder of Donut Economics, which is a framework for really that growth part, that exponential curve that I was mentioning, saying our economies are not meant to grow forever. Growth on this planet is not, infinite growth on this planet is not possible nor healthy. And instead, what if the goal of our economies were to meet human needs, but to stay within the needs of our ecosystems or our planet? And so she offers the donut model for folks interested to learn more. So I heard that frame, renegade economist, felt really inspired. And I find that so many of the challenges of our time, when I go upstream from those challenges, are assumptions underlying mainstream economic thinking, right? That nature is a resource for our use and exploitation, that growth is good and infinite growth is possible, that work is a disutility, that we as humans try to work as little as possible, that we as humans are homo economicus, rational, self-interested beings, that there is no alternative to capitalism, right? These are all assumptions underlying mainstream economic thinking. So I really see the work as a renegade economist to interrogate, challenge, and question those, and then to bring in all these other ways of thinking and all these other economic teachings that can be helpful for this time.
I wonder if I could just come back to one thing. The elephant in the room is the 401k. So, if there's no profit, then how do you save for your retirement? Your dollar now is going to be worth 10 cents if you're a student at Berkeley. So there must be some profit. Otherwise, you can't overcome inflation. And ever since Keynes pointed it out, you need a little bit of inflation, otherwise nothing works. So you have this difficulty. So you do need some profit. I agree there's a not-for-profit sector, but it seems to me, again, the majority of people are going to be working in for-profit businesses. Otherwise, I don't see how we deal with this difficulty, unless you have a full socialist state that says, well, we'll look after you, but we all know that causes major difficulties as well. So in a way, we're kind of stuck with this system. And I'm interested to know what you say about that, because I do hear you that there are these alternatives, but they seem to be really fringe compared to what the big daddy in the room is. The 401k economy, pension funds with trillions of dollars. I mean, they're investing so people have more money when they retire than they put into their pension fund. That's what they're doing. And, so they need to see profit. I mean, how would you address that?
Yeah, no, I really hear that. Well, first of all, there is a beautiful movement of regenerative finance and regenerative investment. RSF in San Francisco is a great one because it's, all the projects that you're investing in and you decide collectively the interest rate. So I would just recommend that RSF to check that out. But yes, this one point that I'm hearing is, right now we as individuals, particularly in the US, are responsible for our own retirement funds. It hasn't always been like that, and it isn't always like that in other places. So part of neoliberalism is this erosion of the safety nets or the services and the attacks on that. So I guess a collective question could be, what is the intervention that we could do to make more public pension funds available and to protect those instead of having it be on the private market? That's one question for reflection to think about. Another is, where is it invested and could it be shifted towards more regenerative investing projects and efforts that are supportive for people and planet? But then there's this other whole area that's really interesting around what is inflation. And you mentioned a few things, but some of the ways that I've found really interesting to think about inflation is it's almost like the collaboration or the agreement of the elite to raise the prices. Like if we look at where the money is really going, it's not going to the 99%. It really is going to the capitalist class. So, how much of inflation is natural or necessary and how much is really decided for the further extraction of wealth from the rest of the economy. And then we have this whole realm of folks like Charles Eisenstein, who wrote Sacred Economics, talk about, negative interest rates, demurrage currency, just looking at money. Like there's some really interesting things that you can explore there. And one of the things that he said that I really resonated with is he said his number one investment tip is to invest in community. It's not the money that is going to support us in the end, although so many of our needs we have to meet in financialized ways. But really it's, do you know your neighbors? Are you embedded in your community? Are you in mutual aid and solidarity with those around you? And particularly as ecological crisis, which is so connected to this growth addiction, is going to get worse and worse and continue to unravel, it's our communities that we really will need to turn towards. So I love that kind of reframe, but it's an excellent question, excellent prompt. So those are some things I'd say to that.
Should we ask people on Zoom?
Yeah, maybe if there's someone on Zoom, they can post in the chat.
No, they can actually just speak.
Oh.
Zoom speak.
They can just speak.
Apologize.
Speak, unmute and speak on Zoom, please. If you have questions, you will come up. You will Zoom. Yeah.
I have a question. This may be too specific, but I think about these ideas of like a gift economy or how to charge. So I'm doing coaching consulting to help small business people be profitable. I mean, successful in just the smallest way of, using the tools of business to create happy lives, right? And create value for people. And there's always this conversation about like, how should I charge? And I need to charge enough for my time so that I can get my groceries and my rent and so on. But I just always this question about it. And I'm not exactly sure what my question is, but if you have any thoughts about how to think about that, probably one of the trickiest parts about it is once you open up the elasticity of how much I charge, then it gets a little hairy. Like, how do you even have that conversation with people?
Yes, excellent question. Would love to respond. So first thing is if we think about that, what are your needs and how much do you need to meet your needs, right? That point of enoughness. That can be a real useful first start. How much do I need to make each month to meet my needs? Now, that additional point of how can I reduce my monetary need through solidarity or other economy ways, great prompt, right? To just invite that, like a childcare collective. If you have children, instead of paying for childcare, you rotate who takes care of the children one night a week, children are cared for, sharing economy, no money is exchanged. So invite that too. But let's say you have this amount, like you have this amount. One thing that I think about is the plants in my garden and what are the ones that offer that financial fruit or abundance, and how can I water or, cater to one if I need more money, or let something go away if I don't need that as much. So my plants have different ways. The plants that are financial have different ways of paying. Some are stable, like X number of hours per week, and others can be as needed. And so in a garden, diversity builds resilience. Diversity builds resilience. So I would say that a mixed income approach can be a real useful thing to support that enoughness point. So I just want to add that layer to it. And so for me, I have a mixed income approach, and I find that really useful. Now, for the coaching that I do, it is by donation. And I know that can sound really scary or, volatile, but here's what I have found. So it's just personal experience, but here's what I have found. The number one benefit to offering the coaching that I do by donation is that it takes this exchange value pressure off of the situation. I enter into the session open, ready to listen, ready to support in any way I can. I am not trying to give them X dollars amount of my attention or time or energy. And for that other person, and I've checked with them, they don't feel like they have to get X number of dollars or amount from the coaching session. I can show up and give my time and attention in that session. And at the end of the call, they have the opportunity to give a gift financial to me. And I find that that practice of generosity and doing it after and not before is a real beautiful thing. Now, it takes a lot of trust, but it really feels good for both sides, right? Now, here's what else it does. It makes it radically accessible. So I can work with people from all over the world who are having different standards of living. I can work with folks who are unemployed or folks who are, very employed and trying to leave an extractive or exploitative workplace. And what that means for me is I feel like more people say yes to it. And so there are more clients, more interest because of that openness and that willingness to do it by donation and to make it more accessible. However, I don't only do that, right? I do that and then I have these other plants, like I said, and those plants cross-pollinate or they have that relationship. So, one question for you could be, is there, if you're feeling that instability or volatility, is there a plant that could give you some stability, the X number of hours per week or per month, so that you can take a little bit of a pressure off of the coaching clients paying certain amounts? Because I understand that can feel maybe scary. But yeah, those are some ways that I think about the gift economy model and find that it really shifts the experience for both of us. Thanks, Chris. Anyone else from the screen?
Does anyone have any response to the prompts that Adela walked us through? The garden.
I just want to put a plug in there about offerings and donations. Safal has put into the link in the chat box just a kind reminder that this is donation based, and any donation that will be going through the portal will be going to Della. Just a plug in there.
Thank you.
I have a question about value, because sometimes if you don't have a material or financial value, there's an assumption that, oh, there's not much worth there. How do you address that? Like I think there's a perception there. If you don't have a dollar value there, that you can be maybe abused in some way with the sense of like your time and your worth.
Excellent question. Yeah, a few things come to mind. One is this strange thing around being able to put a financial value on nature, right? And nature being worth more dead, like a piece of wood rather than a living tree or an ecosystem, or even how we can change things in nature. So that value in nature comes up. But value in labor, an excellent point too. And, I find it shocking, when we're in particular cultures, what we can get used to or accept. So the pay differential in the United States is very extreme. I believe the latest I've seen, I'm going to look to Ron here, but is the medium wage earner to the highest wage earner is 365 times. That's the average pay differential in a US firm. That's my understanding. And that may not shock any of us because we're in that right now. Maybe folks listening are not in the US, so maybe it is shocking to you. But when people come together and decide this collectively, and Christian Felber, who works with the Economy for the Common Good, he's done this research. People on average decide no greater than 1 to 10. So people do say a little differential is fine. Maybe someone has been doing the work for longer. Maybe someone has needs. Maybe someone is a manager or has other responsibilities that are more difficult. So we as humans do accept some pay differential, although there's many communities and workspaces that actually choose pay equality. Arizmendi Bakery here in Oakland, Berkeley, as well as the Sustainable Economies Law Center, they have pay equality. So you can decide equal or 1 to 10 on average, but 1 to 365 times is absurd, right? And just this idea that one person's hour is worth 365 times someone else's hour. And if I think back to the moments that radicalized me, one of them was living in Sweden, where my host father, who was a professor at a university, told me he made the same amount as the janitor. He said that both the janitor and the professor were equal to the functioning of the university, and therefore they deserved equal pay. Now, in Sweden, education is free, so there's a whole element there. But that was a thing that got me thinking. So absolutely, I hear you that why is it that one hour is worth so much less than another hour, or vice versa? What would we decide together? And again, these democratized workspaces, whether it's a worker self-directed nonprofit or a worker cooperative, part of that is that those decisions are decided collectively. And there may be work that doesn't make a lot of money, right? There's not a lot of profitability in there. So we also need those systemic changes, right? Universal healthcare, universal access to commons, for example. We need to decide that collectively as well. Little plug for participatory budgeting. But that idea that if we came together, we would decide things differently. And then also there may be work that, like in a Green New Deal, work that is done that the government provides that doesn't make a whole lot of money, such as ecosystem restoration work, for example, or fire, remediation so that we don't have wildfires, right? We can't monetize or profit on all these things. So what is the work that we do for money that can fund that work? So again, that not-for-profit business model may come in there as well. So those are some things I might add to that. It's a great question.
Just make things. Just.
I'll add one more point. When I work with like an organization or consulting client and they say, how much do you charge? I don't have like a standard, like I am worth this amount, because I hear that in your question too, right? How much am I worth or my hour worth? Instead, sometimes what I'll say is, what's the average that you pay others, right? Because we also know through research that men tend to ask for more money than women do, right? So I'll say like, well, what do you pay people on average? But other times I can get to know the organization. Are they a nonprofit? Are they volunteers? Like let's work with what is your situation, kind of more contextualized to that too. But I really encourage the organizations to be transparent. What are they paying all their other speakers or consultants per hour? What do they pay themselves per hour, right? So those things are really helpful. And then just normalizing that kind of conversation to getting into more equity and more democratic, transparent ways of working together.
I see Terry's online though.
Yeah, I have a question. Nice to meet you, Dalla. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your approach to Right Livelihood, and it seems like it is rooted, at least in part, in recognizing the extractive nature of a lot of our relationships, and especially economic relationships, and finding ways to heal that. And I'm just wondering, how does the Buddhist path for the individual, right? The path towards enlightenment, how does that intersect with this? Or does it? Thank you.
Oh, that's a great question. How does the Buddhist path relate to this? So, one of the things that I was thinking about with this idea of Right Livelihood as a path and not a destination was to connect it to the path of the Bodhisattva, right? Or the Eco-Sattva, as many folks are saying. So this idea of, not leaving the wheel of samsara and going to enlightenment, but returning until the liberation or the enlightenment of all beings is achieved. And so, just as one would commit to that path of the Bodhisattva or path of the Eco-Sattva, this path of Right Livelihood is a part of that. So again, not that there's this destination, but that Right Livelihood is a way. And that, Right Livelihood, I really see as taking our spirituality off the cushion and into a path of engaged activism. So it's such a delicious exploration of like, and I think about leaving retreats where people say the return to the marketplace, right? Like that's a big thing, return to the marketplace. What an incredible experience to leave a retreat where at least I feel so held, so supportive, I get so slowed down, I'm so mindful, and then I'm at a grocery store, or I'm driving, or I'm in my workplace, right? What an opportunity to practice. So I really see Right Livelihood as a place where all of our Eightfold Noble Paths can, elements can be a part of. What is right mindfulness in our workplace? What is right view? What is right action, right? What is right effort? So all of that. So I really see Right Livelihood as a summation and really part of that path of the Bodhisattva. Great question.
What I've noticed I live in a co-housing community, and we're using a governance model called sociocracy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's definitely it works in terms of equivalency of voice and shared decision making. Is very much of a democratizing kind of governance model, which has really held us together. But where I see its limits, and now that I'm living with 30 people for the last 2 years in the system, where the limits are where people do not have a commitment to inner development, which in most of it's just not something that's emphasized in Western culture. And that's where the system runs into big challenges, because people don't even understand their relationship to ego, right? And And so you get into situations like this where you're making decisions together that affect everybody's lives. And, we're just not used to, we're just used to making our own decisions, right? And deciding what we do with our own money. And you get into a situation like this, and there has to be more flexibility with that. So anyway, not to, I feel like I'm talking too much, but I'm really interested in that intersection, right? That devotion to inner development makes us so much more ready to do the kind of work you're really talking about in terms of transformational economies. If we don't have I don't think it can work one without the other, really, just in my experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And did you say inner development? That was the word, right? Okay. I just want to make sure I heard that. Yeah. So first of all, sociocracy, thank you for plugging that. The California Donut Economics Coalition, we use sociocracy. So I'm familiar with it as well, and happy to hear that you're using that in your community housing model. That's amazing. And yeah, one of the documentaries that we produced for the podcast was on worker cooperatives. The first one was, what are worker cooperatives? The second one was, are worker cooperatives a bridge to a post-capitalist future? And one of the things that we found was exactly what you're talking about. A worker cooperative, even with great intentions and structure, can still have that toxicity of culture. And we interviewed folks who felt that it was still hierarchical, even though it was supposed to be democratic, or even racist, right? Like, so there's these other, things that can come into the culture that make it a toxic or harmful environment. So absolutely, that inner development work is crucial. And one metaphor that I've heard for this that I really appreciate comes from the transition town movement. The transition town movement out of Totnes, England, but it's all over the world now. Towns and communities transitioning from peak oil, but also transitioning economies to more local economies. They talk about the importance of inner transition. And so, for example, they'll rotate their meetings to a doing meeting, and then the next meeting is a being meeting, a doing meeting, and then a being meeting. And they'll do the transition work, the outer transition work, like a share shop, a community fridge, a local currency, they have a cooperative-owned brewery, but then they also do inner transition work. They do retreats together, they do nonviolent communication, they do undoing white supremacy work that reconnects, right? So they do that inner development work too. And they talk about how it's like riding a bicycle, where on a bicycle, you need that groundedness, that stability, that balancing of being on the bicycle, being stable, but you also need that forward moving, right? And if you're just into the forward moving, the doing, the action, and you don't have that inner stability or calm, you'll crash. And if you only are sitting and navel gazing and inner transition, and I'm thinking of Nick Mindfulness and Ron Purser over here, the amazing book, if you're just that self-focused and you're not using this to transform systems and society, then you don't go anywhere. So yes, the inner transition, the inner development, crucial to then our outer development, our change in the world. Thank you for bringing that in. Of course.
I give up on this.
A quick question. I know we're getting close to time. We're sitting here in Silicon Valley, obviously, we're close by, and mindfulness is the rage, and it has been in big tech. But right livelihood, I'm not sure. And the question I have is getting back to the notion of right livelihood, in the sense of the intention, being aware if your intention is causing direct harm is, I think, the classical or traditional way of looking at it. But and that, to give you an analogy, if I'm a bus driver and I'm driving a bus and insects are, the nature of my work is I have to drive a bus and the insects are hitting the windshield, my intention is not to kill those bugs. So it's not really wrong livelihood per se in that kind of example. But here's my question. Are engineers and coders who, do they have the intention of doing harm to billions of people on this planet in terms of designing algorithms which are designed for outrage or designed for addiction. We know what's going on with TikTok and so on. Do they really have that intention? Are they liable in terms of wrong livelihood or not? What do you think? I know it's maybe a simplistic question, but
Do you want to answer it first? And then
no, I don't. I want you to answer it.
Okay. Excellent question. And yeah, I'll definitely, okay, so a couple books in case people want to dive into this deeper. So McMindfulness, but also Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention by Johann Hari. Amazing book. I'll just say one reason why. He talks about, like I was saying, the model or the form of the work impacts whether it's harm or not. So he talks about because the model of social media is what is for sale is our time and our engagement, because it's mining our information to then be sold to advertisers. Therefore, it creates things like the endless scroll and trying to stay on as long as possible and activating our negativity bias so that we get radicalized through these loops and we want to stay on the social media forever, the addiction that you're talking about. So he mentions one intervention point there would be if we had a subscription to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, instead of it mining our information for sale, that would be a shift. So again, the like forms or structures really do impact this. Another, is it for profit, right? What if it was a nonprofit, right? What if it was mission driven? Like that would be a total shift to this type of work. So that's one of them. But you know, I really find that so many folks in tech are very collaborative and creative and really love puzzles and coding and all that kind of stuff. And it really is, what is the mission of the company? What is it for? And again, it doesn't have to be for profit, right? It can have a different form or a different mission. So again, that's why in every coding academy, just imagine that you have these alternative business models. So it's like, excellent that you want to do this work, but here's other things that can do. And I will say that I have talked to so many people as a Right Livelihood coach and also as a permaculture teacher of people who have worked in tech and had some sort of awakening, like in what are the ways that their work is contributing to harm or suffering, and have really asked this question: how could I use the skills that I have or what I love, right? Our deepest gladness meets the world's deepest suffering, for something else. So I do think we are at this time of a lot of harm and suffering coming from Silicon Valley, but we're also having a lot of innovation and interesting ways that technology can be used for good, right? E.F. Schumacher, appropriate technology, right? Technology itself is not wrong or bad. So I just want to add that too. And then I love your bus analogy, and it just reminded me of another reference, No Impact Man, Colin Beverman. He is a person who filmed himself and his family for 1 year trying to have no impact on the planet. He said, okay, for 1 year, I'm going to live in my apartment in New York City with my child and my partner, and we're going to have no impact on the planet. And he, biked, and he got his food locally. He even started to turn off his electricity, like all the things, right? Now, one side note here, they didn't change where they worked, and his wife was working in an extractive and exploited place, so she didn't have right livelihood. That was brought up in the film, which is great. But the main insight, spoiler alert, that he comes to is it's not about having no impact, it's also about our positive impact. So he talked about how we have our ecological footprint, which is a whole challenge and question on its own, but what is our ecological handprint, right? So I just think about that too with, I hope that what I said didn't make people think, I just shouldn't exist, right? If I'm really gonna have no impact, because even if I'm just walking out this door, I'm contributing possibly to harm and suffering, right? So what is your positive impact? What is your ecological handprint, your contribution to this time? So I just want to add that to the point about the bus driver.
I wonder if I could just ask you something on this. So what would your advice be for the major industries? Because remember, what is it? I think 90% of the plastic pollution comes from 60 companies. It's that kind of thing. There are big companies that basically run the world, essentially. Yeah. And they are for profit, and they're owned by shareholders who would be very upset if they announced, hey, we're not going to make profit anymore. I mean, it's just not an option. It's just not an option. What is the option? What does one do to interact. Because I mean, my experience, and I used to run a pharma company, I have a lot of experience in that business. I've never met a nasty person. Yet some of the decisions these companies make are hair-raising. And you think, how is this happening? It's because of the structure. So what does one actually do? Because let's face it, you know, the vast wealth is being held by very few, very, very big, multinational, for-profit corporations who are then paying everyone's 401ks. That's the problem. So it's sort of linked together. And they'll say, well, society's basically good. We're supporting people because when they get old, they're going to have some money, and that's what we're doing. And so you go, yeah, but look at all this damage you're doing. And so this is the enigma of the whole thing. And I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. First of all, it is not impossible, and I'm going to give the example of Patagonia.
Oh, yeah.
Patagonia made Earth its only shareholder.
Yes.
That was the not-for-profit business model that I'm talking about. They said, Earth is the one that's going to benefit from the profit, not the
They
shareholder.
weren't publicly owned, though. That was a
true.
privately owned business, so the guy could do that.
Yes. So, you know, again, the way that I think about it is this. Okay, let's take the business, and this is like a hypothetical or artificial, but there are examples of this. How much is enough for each person to make? So again, that point of enoughness. And again, the Kahneman curve, which has been researched, says it's about $100,000 a year. Now that's got to be totally contextualized to place, right? Bay Area or, you know, somewhere else in the world. Do you have kids? Do you have debt? Of course, let's contextualize it. But what is enough, okay? What is the good or service that we want to sell to be able to get all of our employees to make $100,000 a year, okay? How can those supply chains be sustainable and ethical? That's important work to look at that and to make sure of that. But then at the end of the year, the profit is redirected to mission-driven work. Newman's Own foundation, you know, like their 100% of profits go to charity. So this model does exist.
Privately owned.
Yeah, that one is privately owned, yeah.
All privately. You know, give me a public. I mean, the problem is the big companies are publicly owned.
Yeah.
And so they don't have the ability to make that decision
Yes.
because they're owned by the public. What? Who? By pension funds.
Yeah.
So they're the major investors at the end of it.
We need a new charter for corporations.
Absolutely.
What, the government does it? Who does it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what, so a government comes in and says, right, we're going to just stop you from having pensions? Or
No, we reframed the charter. At one time, corporations didn't have the kind of autonomy that they have now.
I mean, this is it. This is the challenge. I mean, that seems to
Totally.
me to be so draconian.
Yes.
That would never, ever, ever happen unless there was a coup and, you know, you had a dictator coming in. There'd be no other way of doing it. I mean, I get it, but I mean, it's not actually going to happen in a democracy, is it? I mean, it's never
I
going to
think
happen.
there are people in that systems design who are working on the legality element of this. Like, what is it a charter? You know, B corporations is not, you know, the answer, but it's a direction in that way where it's not profit is the bottom line, but it's people and planet and profit. Again, Patagonia, but you know, what are the interventions, the systemic shifts that could get us to that? So we don't have personhood for corporations, for example, things like that. Another thing though is if one is working in those institutions, those companies, can they shift it from within? So there are people who could make that shift, and there is a whole realm of post-capitalist philanthropy and movement generation, or folks who are relinquishing their wealth or who are handing over their companies. This time is called the time of the silver tsunami because of all the potential of folks who are baby boomers handing over their sole proprietor businesses to their workers, right? So we're in a real potential there. And then there's also people who are, again, leaving extractive and exploitative businesses to start other forms. So I think there's multiple leverage points, and you feel passionate about this. So I'd ask you, like, what could be your intervention in this? Like, what's the alternative? Another resource to mention, there was a project called, it's called the Next Egg or the Good Egg, but it's the Sustainable Economies Law Center. They embarked on a study group and a project for alternatives to 401k to look at retirement funds and what could be the alternatives around the world. So there are people who are, and even locally, thinking about this question and how could we do this differently. I agree, it's a huge systemic issue.
Now, do you think that this whole digital economy, like cryptocurrency, and that there's a kind of an orientation towards finding other ways than using, just our capital means to find ways to share with each other and to collaborate? And do you think there's some bias in this direction?
In the alternative currency world, I'd say there are some attempts for regenerative cryptocurrencies and really looking at blockchain technology as an alternative and intervening at the point of like who makes money, right? Because we know that it's really banks who make money, who lend money into creation rather than the government. So there are folks who are saying, how is money made? How can it be made differently? How could it be more democratic, right? So there is that. But I would say personally, in terms of complementary currencies, I'm more inspired by local currencies, that movement. And I was just walking here and Berkeley had a sign that said like the Berkeley bucks. It's a local currency. So that's one that I would more uplift. And what that does is you have a currency that is equal to the dollar or the pound, wherever you are, that is directly exchangeable, but that you can only use at local and independent stores and businesses. So I wouldn't be able to use a Berkeley buck in Starbucks, but I could at, the Ugly Mug or, like a local coffee shop. So in the realm of complementary currencies, that's what I would uplift, not as much crypto, but there is a world of people looking into regenerative cryptocurrency space. Who I would point you to if you want to learn more about this, Brett Scott, who wrote a book called Cloud Money, Cash, Crypto, and the War for Our Wallets. And he also wrote the Hacker's Guide to Global Finance. So he is the person I would look to towards all things related to that. And he's got like a blog and everything.
There's one more question that we'll take, and that's from Carol.
Oh, thank you, Wamo. Yeah, I think just hearing Richard talking about the 401k and then the largest monopolies in the world, that structure, somebody in the online in the chat, I think is Charles Lee, said that in biology, and infinite growth is a deadly disease called cancer. I really start more and more to see that the publicly traded companies, that kind of structure is really cancer-like. And then I think what Richard was saying is it's beyond the individual's intention almost. It kind of has a mind of its own. And I think this is where awareness really comes into play, is to help us detect what kind of structure or mechanism is cancerous and what is not. And then so then, like, to me, yes, maybe for those publicly traded companies, those monopolies, that structure has its own propagation mechanisms, but if we are aware of it and we know how much harm it's also doing to the people who are in it, so it's not, in some ways, a lot of people are actually hurt by that. Like even the people who are super, super rich, like they're so in some ways I'm thinking, yes, there's those structures and mechanisms that want to propagate itself, but how about the people? How about yeah, so I'm thinking that, there's so a lot of, for example, a lot of super rich people, what they experience is that there's so much trauma intergenerationally between you know, the super rich people and their kids. So at some point, that kind of canceristic mechanism is going to break down. And then so I think in some ways it's just like how do we open up our awareness, and also how do we open our imagination for like when these kind of cancerous structures can break down, when do we catch the people who are falling through the cracks and then unite those people to do something different. Yeah, so yeah. Um, Sometimes I feel like we're like collectively stuck in a lack of imagination and a lack of action because we feel it's so that these powers are so strong that it's never going to change.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for bringing in that quote. And there's another quote that's, anyone who believes that infinite growth is possible is either a madman or an economist, right? So, and that really weaves together this point about growth on the macro and the micro, weaves everything together that we've talked about. It weaves together the enoughness and the contentedness and the gratitude, but also is the systemic, that we are over the planetary boundaries, over the carrying capacity of our planet. So we need that inner development as well as the outer. And so I do want to also add degrowth, the movement of degrowth. So degrowth is a planned degrowth of our economy. And I'll just let us know about another book, Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World by Jason Hickel. And in it, in case you're like, that sounds terrifying, what would some of those principles be? He says, and end planned obsolescence, right? These are the principles of degrowth, or the policies of degrowth. End planned obsolescence, cut advertising, shift from ownership to usership of items, end food waste, scale down ecologically destructive industries. So looking at what would we want to have less of, or what would we want to scale down? Reduce working time, and there's a whole movement for the 4-day work week. Reducing inequality, debt forgiveness of the global south, reparations, and to decommodify public goods and expand the commons. So again, I invite folks to look into the post-growth movement, the degrowth movement. Donut economics is a part of that. But again, there's a lot of people working in this area as well, saying that it's not only possible, but it's necessary. It's necessary for human and planetary flourishing. So for all of our right livelihood to have a collective conversation around growth, to acknowledge the limits to growth, and then to work towards a post-growth economy.
Thank you. We have one more. Christina, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know if it's really a question or maybe you just have a comment. I found this discussion really interesting because I'm reading this book right now called Sapiens. I don't know if you've read this, but I found it really interesting because, you know, they talk a lot about like us as human beings, and that in every since like the ice age or so, we've destroyed ecosystems. Like we have caused mass distinctions for thousands of years. But related to this conversation that we had, to me, what really struck me is that he talks about the agricultural revolution and how it basically was not better for mankind, that it was actually foraged. Like foraging life is where we had the most work-life balance, and we were like very much in harmony with nature. But the agricultural revolution like really took us to a new place. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like we're just repeating the same history. And I really appreciate Richard's comments, because what he's really trying to get at is that, and I work for a public company and I used to work for nonprofits, but there really is a system to it. Me as an individual who cares is not at the power to change a system. And I've looked for the Patagonias or the private companies, but to make a livelihood, you really do need to work for a public company, get 401ks, and provide in the Bay Area. And so this quote really got me in this book about how it says, the story of the luxury trap carries with it an important lesson. Humanity's search for an easier life released immense forces of change that changed the world in ways nobody envisioned. it's a series of trivial decisions that that really leads this culminating effect of forcing ancient foragers to days carrying water buckets under the scorching sun. And so I do appreciate like the comments you made about trying to change the structure, but I can't help when I'm like reading this book about time after time of humanity, of how can we really make these major structural changes. It really does feel like it's the universe or spirituality just like taking us on this journey that's kind of a little out of our control. So I just had that comment, and I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Testing, testing. There we go. Oh, thank you for bringing that in and also for sharing about your own experience. And yeah, I absolutely hear you. And one thing that comes to mind, another book reference, Jenny Odell, Saving Time, a local person, local author. She really had me think differently about time and this way that we have this idea of a one directional sense of time, or like a progression, or like things are going to keep getting worse and worse. And she gives this example of like, there was a time when people couldn't see the end of slavery. Like there was a day when they didn't believe it was possible that slavery would be forever. And then literally the next day, there was no slavery in that form in the United States. Like it happened overnight. And Jenny Odell talks about the ways that we think we know how something's going to go, and then we show up and something is totally different. So I just invite this alternative sense of time and it not being linear, and that we can, imagine other systems, other alternatives, maybe even ones that we don't even conceptualize yet or even know or see. And Joanna Macy, again, who I'll uplift, she says, any act with good intention sends out ripple effects into the web of life in ways we cannot measure or even see. Any act with good intention sends out ripple effects into the web of life in ways we cannot measure or even see. So all our actions and efforts, we have no idea the ripple effects of those actions and efforts in our lives. And I mean, I have heard of a couple of them that have come back to me, of like someone who did their entire master's dissertation on an Upstream podcast episode, or someone who listened to something or did something and then created a worker cooperative, or totally left their corporate job and shifted to something else. So, and those are only what I know about. So I really just challenge us to think differently about this forward progression march of time, and be open to the possibility of wonder and entertain that, magic and mystery may happen. And then I'll also add that, these things may feel big, like how do I transform the banking system or the 401k system or, the monetary system? So what I would invite here is, one way, these are ways that you can contribute. One is to lead, right? You can get involved in the movement for that alternative. We have the New Economy Coalition in the US. We have the Monetary Alliance work that they're doing. There's the public banking movement in California. There's the donut economics movement that I mentioned. So take a lead in that. That's one way. But another way is to follow, right? To support, to advocate for, to join the listservs, or to donate, or to volunteer, right? To support in ways that you feel called to support. Another is to uplift, right? To just use, like Ron, with books or podcasts, right? To uplift these. Start a donut economics book club. Read it together. Make sense of it together. Does it make sense? Ask your friends if they know what a credit union is, or a worker self-directed nonprofit, right? Or has anyone heard of Mondragon, the world's largest cooperative ecosystem in the world? Like, just talking about it, making it more known. So that's another. And then another way is to embody the change, right? And this definitely takes privilege, but for those of us who can we move our money from an extractive and exploitive bank to a credit union? Can we move our investment to regenerative investment, to maybe RSF or somewhere else like that? Can we move to a housing cooperative, as someone shared with us? Can we, buy from a cooperative cafe, or grocery store, right? We have Rainbow Grocery here in the Bay Area. So can we embody the economy that we wish to see as well? Mutual aid, solidarity economy stuff, gift economy as well. So those are some things, but I would just really invite to trust that the movement is there for these alternatives. And also let's weave this into our Buddhism communities and practices. Talk about Dana, about gift economy, about right livelihood, about systems change. How can our actions and efforts in the Buddhist communities be for this systemic shift? I think that's another intervention. But beautiful questions. Thank you so much for those. Thank you to Dharma College for welcoming us and inviting this conversation on working with wisdom. And I just want to send a intention or a well wish that all that we spoke about and looked at today in our own livelihoods and in that of systemic, may this ripple out into the web of life, may it benefit all beings. And wherever you are in your livelihood journey, may you feel that sense of empowerment and alignment and go forth with maybe some curiosity and some next steps as you tend towards your livelihood garden. So thank you so much, Wangmo, Richard, Ron, for inviting me, and thank you all for joining online. Bye, everyone.
Actually, there might be an opportunity for Terry. I don't know if she's still going to say something.
I think of the night, I can hear it.
Terry? Terry?
Steve, you come on.
Terry?
Terry, can you hear us?
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
yes.
Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, Mama wanted me to mention that Dharma College, we're having a retreat this summer on skillful means, which is, it is really the path, the traditional path towards right livelihood. And it's August 8th through 11th. It'll be in Berkeley. And I love that Della used the word Shabbat, right? Like that the time to stop and rest. And I think this really will give us an opportunity as a community to be able to stop, be able to reflect, be able to kind of go back to our roots, to create magic in our lives and take the time and space to really create those inner shifts that enable us to go back into the world and move towards true right livelihood, to really align those things. So I really hope people will join us in doing that. And there's information on the Dharma College website about the retreat.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you to Della for tonight's beautiful discussion, and we hope that you can come back again and share more, especially since we're so close to UC Berkeley and we've talked about having some of those seniors over here and hearing a little bit about what their right livelihood might look like and what we could do to serve in this community. We'd like to offer you a small katak, which is a symbol of good long life and auspiciousness to be carried with you, and a little book on skillful means, which is something that we try to teach here at Dharma College. So thank you.